Okay, I've drilled down, and of course my gauge went one full revolution in 100 thousandths and an additional 30 thousandths, which means I will have a step in there 85 thousandths down, and you'll see why here in a second. Okay, I hope you can see I've created a step down in there. The final hole is drilled with an F, which is a couple thousandths over a quarter inch, and the outside is 5/16. So I didn't go in here. Basically, if you kind of look at this thing, that's what that is. This is a quarter inch, and then there's 5/16. We'll sit on that ledge, and now I can draw things up tight, and this is just a temporary one, and I can adjust that shoulder, but that shoulder sitting down in there on that ledge. I can pull my butt cap up tight. There we go. That's actually pretty good. Not too bad of a fit, but I can pull that up tight without scratching the surface of my butt cap. I can get within, on my lathe, I can turn that shoulder to where I'm just, 5 or 6 thousandths off of the surface so that it doesn't scratch because that's going to be hot blued. So that's why we just did all that. Okay, imagine that when this finial goes down in there and gets bolted into the tang, that if the threaded tang is not coming out of the handle material where it exits, the plane of the handle material is not a 90 degree, then where everything, okay, see how I'm kind of holding this finial at an angle to the butt cap? That's how it's sitting on the handle, which means that the shoulder and the finial and the butt cap and the back butt of the handle material are not all on the same plane. So what I'm doing is I took the handle material, stuck it back in the mill, and what I'm doing is, if you can see here, I put it in here a little bit at an angle so that I'm starting with the end mill here just at 0, but I'm gradually taking off material. You can see how where I've cut goes from something to nothing. So I'm changing the angle of the butt of the knife, and I do that on the face of the handle too. If the handle looks like it's sitting cockeyed when I butt it up against the guard and stuff, if it's sitting cockeyed, I bring it over here, tilt it a little bit, and change the angle. But the angle always remains at a 90 degree to the sides of the handle material. So that's another way that I use my mill and keep things flat and happy. Okay, hopefully what I am going to show you is actually going to work. Of course I don't have a third hand, I just have these two hands. Here's our fit right now, but I have that finial cranked in there incredibly tight with those vice grips. All right, but what I want you to see is it almost looks like it's it's cranked on there about as tight as I can, and you can see no gap between the finial and the butt cap. Now I'm going to set the camera down and unscrew that. Oh, really? Well, I'm a liar. Boy, but not by much. See, I'm just barely touching the face of that. And I don't really want to touch it at all because this is going to be hot blued black. This is going to fall off there now. So what I do is I'll put this in my lathe. See where my thumbnail is? I'll put this in my lathe, and I'll just take off a couple thousandths right there where my thumbnail is, which will lengthen this shoulder where it sits down on that ledge inside the butt cap, and I'll just create a couple more thousandths of space between this and the surface of the butt cap. That way when it's hot blued you can crank it down tight, but it won't it won't scratch the bluing. But I mean, I just barely touching it. Almost enough to just say leave it alone. And I might. As well, here's another little secret. I just throw this on the surface grinder and take off 3 or 4 thousandths on the surface grinder of this very surface, and it will create some space between the two. So there's so many ways of approaching knife making. I'll probably do that. As a matter of fact, who knows, I might not even use this finial at all. Probably not, because it's stained. No, I can't. I have to turn a new one because this is stainless, and these are getting hot blued black, so I got to use mild steel. I have to turn a new one. This will just be a temporary, but you get the idea of the fit and what I can do to make things all happy and pretty. Okie dokie. Until later. Okay, this is a little sort of a. This is just a about a 4x6 solid piece of steel, and I use it as a bench anvil for punching holes and stuff like that and setting pins. But what I do also is I'll put a little dot once I get my parts, which I'll say real quick, the knife is basically all the parts are fitted at this point. It's just a whole stack, a continuing stack of flat level surfaces. But I'll put a dot and a dot and a dot as little indicators of where they go on the top of the knife. You know what I'm saying. So just so it always goes back together the same way, that dot goes to the top of the tang. And this dot on the spacer goes to the top, and the same thing on the butt cap. So that's why I do that. Now, what I did was you'll see these are much smaller now. These are the size. The butt cap and that spacer are the size of the, by the way, here's my tang hole, are the size of the butt of and the face of the handle material. They're going to be, that's the biggest they will ever be. Now what I do is I'm going to take some time and I'm going to shape the butt cap and the spacer to their final dimension within hand finishing tolerances. But I'm going to shape them, leaving the handle material square like this. And then I'll show you how I get things centered up, and then I shape the handle to meet the shape of the spacer and the butt cap. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to shape these to their final dimension, then I'm going to pin them, then I'm going to get the handle pinned on there, and then I'm going to shape the handle using the hardware as my guide. And I'll do it entirely with a cabinet Nicholson number 49 cabinet maker's rasp, a half round on one side and flat on the other side, and some of my other files that I use, and that's how I'll shape this handle to the hardware dimensions. Okay, that was a whole bunch of talking to say something pretty simple, wasn't it? Okay, well, yesterday that video part 1 ended because my battery was going dead and I had to draw things to a close. So this is where we're at, and we're going to put into play our spacer and butt cap. And the first thing you can do is you can see how much bigger than the ricasso that spacer is. So the first thing I'm going to do is reduce its vertical dimensions so it's maybe 30 thousandths or 40 thousandths bigger than the ricasso top and bottom, and start getting it dialed in. And then I'm going to shape it, and as soon as I end this segment here, I'm going to stick in a picture of a knife that I'm using as the platform for this design, and you can see where on the top and bottom of that spacer, I'm going to have a flat spot that is equivalent to the spine of the knife. I'm going to have a flat spot that runs along the spine and the belly of the handle material. So I'll start getting this spacer dialed in, and you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, now you can see where I have vastly reduced the size of that spacer. I've still left it, wow, that looks so weird. It's only about maybe 30 thousandths tall, but in the camera it looks a lot bigger than that. Oh well. So I'm a lot closer where I want to be, but I'm still full width on this. I want my spacer to end up being about maybe 7/8 wide, which is 875 thousandths, right? So we got 875 thousandths. Now, my tang hole there is on the spacer, let's see, minus is 252 thousandths equals divided by 2. So on each side I need basically about 312 thousandths. So what I do is I will take this spacer and my dial caliper and put this on, oh, all I gotta do is get close, I don't know, about 320 thousandths. I can always make this smaller. This is where we get into the place where we can only do things one time. And then I go right to my, of course if I had two hands here you understand what I'm doing. I'm going to scribe a line using my guard, or using that spacer material, and scribe a line, and that'll determine my width. And then I'm gonna do something else here in a little bit. You get the idea. So I'll be back here in a second, and we're going to show you, talk about the flat spot on the top and the bottom. Okay. How's my camera doing here? What I've done is, you can see that I've scribed a couple lines right along the tang hole up to the top. There you go. That's not too bad. You can see that line. That area up there between those two lines is going to remain flat. And then I've scribed a line, of course, the two lines for the width, which are 310 thousandths on either side. I know that'll be identical. I can always take this off and tweak it on my grinder and measure and get it exactly dead center. Then I've scratched a line from left to right through the center that way. Well, I'm going to connect this line here down to that intersection right there with a particular radius that I will probably use. Come up in here, and what do we have? I got a whole bunch of different sets of these with reference marks and for shaping guards and so forth. But I'll probably use something like this to, create a radius somewhere on here and connect these lines to start getting the spacer shaped. I will do that, and then I'll come back and show you what I end up with. Okay, now using my French curve there, this is basically going to be the shape of the spacer. I'll go into the grinder and grind off the things that don't look like what I want, and I'll be back in a little bit. So I just thought I would show this real quick, because I've left some meat outside. I scribed the scribe lines big anyway, and I've left a little extra meat out past the scribe line, because we all know you can take it off but you can't put it back on. As well, I'm going to be filing the my handle material here to shape, so I'm going to be hitting this with file and stuff that needs to be cleaned up. So just kind of another rule in knife making, or a good practice, is when you start doing a project, you don't want to go right to where you want it to end up at the beginning. You want to gradually get there. Always leave everything big. When you scribe lines, don't take the line out, just gradually work your way to it, and you can get things dialed in as you go. And you can go too far, and then you get a scratch on something, you got to remove it, and you go, well, heck, now it's too small. So slower equals better, better equals faster. Okay, I use this thing. I got a couple surface plates here, but this is a 12 by 18 with ledges, so you can clamp things on it and stuff. But this is a block of steel that I have ground so the sides are parallel. So it's surface ground. This is a bar that the sides has been surface ground. And I'm going to clamp my knife into this deal coming through here. Remember, my ricasso is surface ground too, so those sides are parallel and flat. And I'm going to clamp it in this thing, and it's going to give me a reference on the center line of the knife. I'm going to got to turn this off and then clamp it in there, and you'll see what I'm saying. There'll be a piece of tape to protect the ricasso.